Welcome to The Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to The Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. In the past 2 years, measures taken to deal with the COVID virus have resulted in extraordinary losses of freedom in the West, in fact, all over the world, driven by government mandates and lockdowns. Now that it's clear we're no longer in the throes of a pandemic, what next? In what circumstances and for how long are citizens prepared to accept these extraordinary extensions of state power and withdrawal of their civil liberties? In this case, it was the cause of public health. But how likely is it that government in the future will use the same draconian measures for other so-called emergencies? I'm worried that we're sliding into a permanent tyranny in the name of protecting us. With me to dig into this question are Dr. Naomi Wolf. She's the author of 7 nonfiction bestsellers and co-founder and CEO of Daily Clout.io. She's a doctorate in Victorian poetry from Oxford and writes on Substack as Outspoken with Dr. Naomi Wolf. It's a terrific read, and I highly recommend everybody subscribe. It's her thoughts, as she says, as an eyewitness to a new dark age with thoughts on how to keep liberty, justice, and human rights alive. And I am thrilled to have my friend and returning guest, Jenin Younes, join us. She's litigation counsel for the New Civil Liberties Alliance, NCLA. She's a former public defender and is, after seeing governments throughout the nation violate human rights and civil liberties in an ostensible effort to mitigate the spread of COVID, she's now joined the fight against lockdowns and the administrative state. And her group is doing a lot of great work on the administrative state, and we'll talk about that. So let's start with Naomi. Naomi, what do you've written extraordinarily about Canada recently, and also how you liken what's happening in this country to what Nazi Germany looked like in the early 30s.
I started writing about the descent into fascism in 2008 with my book, The End of America. And I mention that because what you see in looking at dying democracies, in whether they're being killed off by tyrants on the left or on the right, is that tyrants always take the same 10 steps. And because I saw that pattern, I was able to predict with sort of 99.5% accuracy, sadly, I wish I'd been wrong, the descent into tyranny that we're seeing now. So, yet, you're absolutely right. I wrote about Canada and its sort of 48-hour foray into full-out totalitarianism. And I pointed out that we're in real danger in the United States because, among other reasons, there are sort of unidentifiable security forces, violent men in uniform in Canada, but also in Paris, unidentifiable violent men in uniform beating up protesters. And what you see in a dying democracy is militias, basically mercenaries, contractors, armies for hire. And there are armies for hire around the world, from entities like formerly named Blackwater, now XE. And so that really worries me because they're right over our border. And the other thing that worries me considerably is this new benchmark of freezing assets of critics. That is a whole new introduction into what had been a capitalist system. It's full out Marxism. And it's quite terrifying because it does have an immediate chilling effect, an immediate deterrent effect on everyone who might help or support or raise their voices in any kind of civil society way. And by the way, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada explicitly grants the protesters or any critic of the government the right to assemble freely and to speak freely. And then moving on to our own country, I think the biggest unreported story of our century is that last Friday, now it's getting more attention, President Biden uh, extended the Emergency Act, which had been re-upped 8 times since the pandemic began, but this time he extended it in an open-ended way and in a way that funnels billions of dollars to HHS. So why is this so scary? A, it's open-ended, and history shows that tyrants never give back emergency powers once they have them. But B, it's so scary because what we're seeing at Daily Clout, which monitors legislation and it drafts model legislation, is that states such as Washington State and now yesterday New York State, Illinois has a bill. They are changing Board of Health regulations, so bypassing their legislatures to create quarantine camps where you can be detained indefinitely if you've been exposed to a contagious disease and you don't get out, without a judicial petition, and you have to behave in a certain way when you're in quarantine. And you can't. I mean, I read this regulation in New York State yesterday in a state of quite serious terror. It says you can't come within 6 feet of another human being while you're in detention. So it's these like extraordinarily tyrannical Board of Health empowerments. And another creepy thing is that they're starting to target mental health as under the aegis of the Board of Health. And so what that's going to do is it's going to create a kind of mental health aegis for militarized boards of health, in effect, to criminalize dissent. Essentially, if we don't agree, if we're critics, the boards of health will have the right to detain us. And so all of these are things that you do see in, when there's a power grab. And that's why, just to wrap it up, that's why I say these days that the coup in America has already taken place.
Well, Stalin and the Soviets used mental health as a way to deal with incorrect political thought, and that's kind of where we are. Jenin, are you doing anything on the freezing assets concern or the Emergency Act that Biden just put in place? What are you guys doing to bring attention and to help stop that?
Well, we haven't looked at that yet at all. So the freezing of assets is only in Canada. That's correct, right?
Right.
Yeah. We can't do anything outside the United States. But I agree. I mean, we're in an incredibly scary time. And even though a lot of the mask and vaccine mandates, which I've been, working on fighting for the past 8 or 9 months, fighting against, even though a lot of those appear to be going away, what really bothers me is that all of these politicians and the populace basically haven't repudiated them on sort of civil liberties grounds or constitutional grounds. Instead, it's, well, cases are dropping, so we can do away with vaccine mandates or mask mandates for now. But it's clear that if, cases go up again or there's another pandemic, we can, no matter how severe, we can bring all of these things back. So we're in very scary times, and we live, I think, in a society where a lot of people don't understand freedom and the importance of freedom.
Well, what was the tweet you sent me? Freedom now is considered what?
Well, white supremacy. Is that the one?
Yeah.
The Washington Post ran an article saying that freedom was a white supremacist concept. I mean, which is just, I don't know, tell that to Harriet Tubman, but it's just completely ridiculous.
Well, I did a show with James Lindsay on critical race theory, and he just calls it race Marxism flat out.
Yeah.
But it's Naomi, your visual that struck you also struck me, which is these thugs in Canada that are showing up, and they look like they're straight out of the 30s. They look out of a bad Nazi movie. I mean, I thought of Canadians as these very sort of nice, passive people, and all of a sudden you see 53 Blutos show up kneeing people on the street. I mean, do you think that's a private armed service, or is that just a secret piece of what the Canadian government's had in place, and they're now just rolling it out?
Well, I guess, what I miss is real journalism, right? Because it's too early to know. But what reporters should be doing is asking that question. And the other thing I want to say is that the reason I'm so worried about contractors or private armies is that I'm one of the few reporters who's ever gone to Guantanamo. And what I saw there was that the military, a military or a National Guard or Mounties, have real rules, and even in war, they have rules of engagement. There are things they cannot do. But contractors, as you see in Iraq, it's the Wild West. And what I saw in Guantanamo was that these contractors, that were unnamed, that seemed kind of Velcro patch with no name attached, right? You can't follow up, you can't file a complaint, you don't know who they are. They're the ones who were tasked with doing the horrible things that the U.S. military are forbidden to do by law. So what's really scary about a state of emergency, which people don't understand, in my essay, which is now at like 82,000 views about the Canadian situation, pointed this out, and I hope it had an impact of some kind, is that parliamentarians don't understand how much in danger they are when someone like Justin Trudeau declares a state of emergency, and they don't understand that they are not protected if those are private contractors, if those people do report to Justin Trudeau alone and not to the people of Canada within the laws of Canada. So people really have to understand what a terrifying thing an emergency order is, what a state of emergency is, how it bypasses all of the laws that keep us safe and give us, recourse if someone abuses us. And also, I want to say at this point in history, the people who, people get beaten up by thugs like that at this point in history. It happened in Italy with Mussolini and his black shirts. It happened under the National Socialists with brown shirts. In 6 months in 1933, they rounded up civil society leaders, beat them up, roughed them up, and, you didn't even need concentration camps at that point. Within 6 months, they had quieted all of civil society dissent. So that is really terrifying that those thugs are up there. I would also say, as someone who's been a political consultant to a presidential campaign and a vice president, the way that the images were transmitted in France and in the Netherlands earlier and now in Canada, they're very theatrical, right? They're very cinematic. Those guys were posing, that the kind of phalanx, the violence. Usually when police do bad things, they're not trying to get all the cameras in the world, recording the bad things, because their badges are there and they will they will be investigated. But these guys, I predicted this on War Room before it happened, because this is standard. They are trying to tell the world, this is what happens to you when you protest. So the images are intended to be terrifying.
Well, it's part of an attempt to intimidate us and chill speech.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what's going on in Canada. I mean, and it's going on
here too.
Yeah,
I mean, you're not.
You had your Twitter.
We're talking with somebody who no longer has a Twitter
exactly.
account. And that's another. These sort of things.
Yeah.
I wonder why people are so passive, so bovine, and yet they may not be, but they don't know what everybody else is thinking, because they're not allowed to have an ordinary, honest, open conversation or debate about vaccine efficacy or whether lockdowns really work, or all the sort of things that are in the public square now. There is no public square, and I guess we're now seeing the public square is going to get filled with these guys in these black leather jackets, which is
well, and I think so. I think what happened.
And by the way, in this show we get to speculate, so
yeah,
we don't have to. You don't have to be. You don't have to be too careful. You're a very careful lawyer, but you get to give us your grander theories as well.
Well, I think a lot of people actually agree with us, even if they're maybe not as passionate or not as willing to, speak out or go out on a limb over it. Because what obviously happened over the last few weeks was that a lot of these Democratic politicians got horrible polling predictions. And that's why I don't know if you've noticed, but like one day they all dropped vaccine mandates, mask mandates went away. It was very strange. Here in DC, Mayor Bowser, from one day to the next, said tomorrow, no vaccine passport, which was just bizarre after, really, she had been doubling down on this. So I think a lot of people think this, they're just not saying anything. But when it came to the polling, it was obvious where their opinions lie.
Well,
can I jump in on that?
Yeah, let me just do a quick spot here. This is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Naomi Wolf and Jenin Younes, and we're talking about this drift we're seeing towards totalitarianism. Naomi?
Yeah, just to chime in with what Jenin pointed out, there's something else happening in the background that I think, I 1,000% agree with you, Jenin, that it's about the polls and the, months leading up to the midterms, which historically are very dangerous months, right? And if history is a guide, there's going to be so much instability leading up to midterms, everything possible to prevent there from being a clean, accountable midterms. But what's also happening in the background is the Pfizer data were forced to be released. And the insurance companies are seeing that there's 20, 30, 40% rise in deaths after the vaccines were rolled out. And people like Ed Dowd, this former BlackRock investment advisor, is coming forward saying we're going to see that fraud was committed by Pfizer. And even the initial documents that have been released under court order by Pfizer show that there were 1,200 deaths in the first 90 days after the vaccine. And as Ed Dowd pointed out, in the control group, more deaths in the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. So this is a massive fraud, and it's about to come out, or it's coming out. And to me, that's why the New York Times, which has been way up front propagating fraud. I've been screaming about the defects in the data on that big front page COVID map, because I understand how you make digital dashboards. That's what we do as a business here at Daily Cloud. Their data has been corrupt from the start. And only now that there's going to be an investigation of the CDC, that there's people like Dr. Henry Ely submitting a call for a grand jury investigation for willful misconduct by the CDC about their data, and the Pfizer data about to emerge, that they kept injecting people when people were dying and being maimed. I think that people are laying down a paper trail, and Jenin, you know much more about this as a lawyer than I do, but it seems like the Democrats additionally are laying down a paper trail to protect them from being swept up in what are going to be, massive lawsuits and criminal charges related to this fraud.
Jenin, this seems like a litigation-rich and target market for you.
Well, yeah.
It's the Pfizer thing is a big deal.
Yeah.
And the guy who dug into this is a serious man. He was ran $10 billion for BlackRock, worked there for 10 years. It's ironic he should come from BlackRock because they're hardly friends of freedom there, but he is. And if Pfizer has covered up this data, wow.
Yeah, if they have, I'm sure there will be lawsuits, and especially if anybody's been injured as a result of that. I am going to withhold opinion on that specific subject as to
our careful lawyer here.
But I will say, there was an article recently, I think in the Times, about how there's been a huge spike in non-COVID deaths. That may also be related to lockdowns, rising substance abuse. There have been a lot of drug overdose deaths, suicides, et cetera. So it's clear, how destructive these policies are. And then there was actually a New York Times article which shocked me about how the CDC has been hiding data about the boosters. So the data was showing they provided no benefit to people under 50, so it's all risk, and especially to young men. And the CDC hid that data along with some other information about it. So it's just really stunning.
Unbelievable. And Rochelle Walensky has a college-age son. The inhumanity of these people hiding data that could save young adults from risk without benefit. It's extraordinary to me.
One of the reasons I wanted to get both of you on is that you've both made an interesting journey from maybe a different place politically, the left. I know we talked about this earlier, Jenin, in your case, and I don't like labels at all, and I can't even define where we are now because I don't have a label for me. I certainly don't have a label for you. But this mask in particular, let's take masks as an example. It seems to divide up neatly along political lines. If you voted Democrat, you're wearing masks. We went out to dinner last night, and we live in a highly Democrat neighborhood. And the mask mandate's gone, and yet everybody still had them on, and it's a sign of virtue signaling or something. Yeah. So what is it with the left versus right schism on the mandates and the masks and the lockdowns?
Well, I do think there's been quite a realignment. I mean, several commenters have noticed it's sort of more like authoritarianism versus freedom these days. And
Right.
and Naomi knows a lot. I mean, I get contacted by disaffected Democrats every day, tons of them. So I think a lot of people are seeing through this. But initially, because I think Trump came out, sort of wasn't sure about masks and wasn't sure about lockdowns, and the left and Democrats hated him, I think their reaction was, well, if Trump says this, it must, Trump says X, it must be negative X. So I think that's a little bit of what happened. But I know Naomi also has interesting thoughts on that.
Yeah, what's this about?
Well, I mean, first, when you ask that question, I'm just smiling because literally maybe a year and a half ago, I met Jenin, and she and I were like refugees from the left, having a glass of wine and saying, what is happening to the people around us? We are astonished to watch what's happening. I agree with Jenin 1,000% yet again, that it is a realignment, a different axis of authoritarianism versus freedom. And it's a great opportunity if you had good leadership that was willing to be transpartisan or inclusive and find common ground, because there are many more of us than there are of, the oligarchs at this point, which are also transpartisan. I often point out that, the World Economic Forum cleverly has liberals in Canada and conservatives in the UK and a conservative in Australia and a liberal in New Zealand. And, there's nothing partisan about the power grab we're seeing globally. So it's a mistake to have a tunnel vision of partisanship, when you say who are the bad guys. But I do have, friends and loved ones who are not only Democrats, but in that bubble of CNN, MSNBC readers, New York Times readers, and their view, like we are as a country getting two absolutely different information streams. Paradoxically, I was always taught that Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon are evil, and they're doing better reporting on this than the New York Times or the Washington Post, let alone CNN and CNBC. But it means that when I talk to my loved ones, intelligent people, they literally believe that the pandemic is ending because of masks and lockdowns. Yeah. They literally believe that the more you get boosted, the healthier you're going to be, or that this is the big lie of all time, and it really has affected my life, that unvaccinated people are more dangerous to be around than vaccinated people, even though the vaccines don't affect transmission per the manufacturers. But you can, like Jenin and I have talked about this, what a lot of, liberal or Democratic voting refugees like us are noting with sadness, and people are starting to analyze it, is that our loved ones are in, it's been called a mass formation psychosis by that Belgian psychologist, but there are other names for it. They're in a kind of mass hysteria, and you can't really chip away at it with facts or logic. And that's sadder than anything. I mean, it's dividing families, it's dividing friends, and it's scary to see people. I mean, literally, I have beloved friends. One is a Democratic judge. One was a high level editor of a major news outlet, and they literally cannot hear evidence to the contrary of what the narrative is. They've changed, right? They don't say that doesn't hold up or those sources are not good. They say, don't show me that. It's like a religion, and that's scary.
What do both of you think about Robert Malone saying this is a mass psychosis formation?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually listen to that
that's
episode.
That's a new term for. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but it was because we did a show, a year and a half ago. I said it looks like, yes, there's a pandemic, but it's a pandemic of fear.
Yeah.
Much more than a pandemic of a virus.
Yeah.
And I think what I see is this hysteria. I didn't know there was a big word for it, mass formation psychosis.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, became scared out of their minds. And then one thing I've really noticed with my family and friends who are mostly from the left, well, I'm not really friends with them anymore, but so I talk more to my family, but they really trust the New York Times. They trust the CDC. They trust these institutions, and they need that. They can't, and if I tell them, like, look, the New York Times is lying to you about masks. They're not portraying the science. The CDC is doing the same thing. they keep manipulating science. They keep putting out these absurd studies that, the last one I mentioned to you earlier today, based on self-reporting, which has so many intrinsic bias issues. The last study they put out, it was from like April to October in certain places. So they had like purposely manipulated the time and geography to fit
the CDC.
The CDC saying, oh, this shows that masks work. So and because these institutions are doubling down on, ostensibly showing these measures work, my mother just can't get it through her head that they're not being honest. She can't bring herself to believe it. It's easier for her to think I'm crazy than to think these institutions are lying to her.
Well, it seems like the tectonic plates are really shifting. It seems like left versus right, Democrat versus Republican. I don't think any of that stuff seems to align with what people are thinking and feeling now.
No.
And the loss and trust of government is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Well, Jenin, how weird though, right? That our side was supposed to be the critical thinkers, and the conservatives are supposed to be the dumb, credulous, Trump-loving, beer-swilling, uneducated masses. Why do you think it's our kind of highly educated, critically trained friends who are needing to believe in authorities so much and have absolved themselves of critical thinking?
I mean, I spend all my time thinking about this. I mean, I think there were a series of events, things sort of, what I talked about, I called Trump derangement syndrome because Trump took a certain position. I think that was one factor, and things may have played out differently if Hillary Clinton was president during that time. That's one thing. It's trust in experts. I think there are actually sort of the safety culture, the woke culture, I would say, that it's not very, it's sort of simplistic and sort of embrace this idea of safety in this weird way without thinking about other factors outside of COVID. And I think there's sort of this expert class, we overeducate too many people who aren't that smart, to put it bluntly. And so they're not actually capable of thinking critically, and so they're obsessed with expertise, because someone's an epidemiologist, that they must have that. We have to listen to them as though there's no other, disciplines that can inform our policies or our approach to these things.
Yeah, I think you're right. I did just want to show you all this book when we were talking about kind of mass hysteria and hallucination.
Here, hold it up so we can get it on the camera there.
Sorry. Combating cult mind control.
I think I
love that. Combating cult mind control. Okay.
And I just mentioned this because in addition to mass formation psychosis, which I think is, one useful sort of analysis that this psychologist who Robert Malone cited has come up with, there's something else that I'm seeing happen, in terms of this mental illness problem. And it believe it or not, it relates to anorexia and other OCD type behaviors. When I wrote The Beauty Myth, a million years ago, I argued that anorexia and bulimia and body dysmorphia, exercise fixations, were not organic mental illnesses, but were induced mental illnesses from practices like restricting food, when you're dieting, and also the cultural compulsion to constantly surveil your body as inadequate, and that created a kind of OCD type behavior that was then kind of addictive and self-reinforcing. And later studies proved that was true. I mean, even brain scans proved that was true. So I think something very similar is at work, where people have been asked to be, obsessively mindful that their breath doesn't get out, or that they don't get more than 6 feet, in proximity with another human being, especially children. And they're being asked to see the world as full of germs and other human beings as full of germs and potentially fatal to them, and a hug will kill them. And this constant need to kind of scan your body and scan the environment, I think, is creating a kind of OCD type, literally new reactions. And I think brain scans would be really interesting to see if this is true or not. But it's very much like the kind of obsessive self-monitoring that leads to anorexia and bulimia. And those are very hard illnesses, neurologically to recover from, because the brain kind of habituates to being addicted to the reward that you get from following those restrictions. So I do think, and doctors are seeing this, that their patients are addicted to masks. They can't bring themselves to take off the masks. And I do think that there's been kind of an alteration of the minds of people. And the last thing I'll say is about isolation. I've studied torture, and isolation is a big part of torture. In fact, that's why the Geneva Conventions say solitary confinement is a form of torture. And what studies have found with solitude and enforcing solitude is that it creates psychotic damage to the brain. Like people start to hallucinate, they start to become psychotic, and it's permanent brain damage. So I think solitude could have also changed people's brains. Like I interviewed a young adult who has been in a room in Brooklyn for the last 2 years, being perfectly au courant with his other friends who are also holed up in their rooms in Brooklyn. But when I proposed to him that he'd go out on the road and report something from the road, a look of absolute terror crossed his face. And I'm seeing this kind of agoraphobic, fear-based reaction to just being out in the world, being around other people, that I think is beyond
Has anybody
logic.
done any statistical work on this? We're a country of 350 million people. And, I go to a gym in Adams Morgan in DC, and I've got a trainer there who's like a regular guy. And he assures me that what we're talking about is not widespread. He says, Bill, just look at all the football games on TV and you'll see, he said, look at the Super Bowl. Los Angeles had a mask mandate, and you look at the Super Bowl and nobody in the stands was either social distancing or wearing a mask. And so you have people in those ordinary circumstances not acting the way we're talking about. And yet all of us who sort of are interested in ideas and trends and things like that start identifying this. Is this something we're just seeing because we're noticing it, or is this something that's really widespread and is really a cancer in America that is going to change us forever?
I suspect it's a pretty small. I suspect it's a relatively
That was a 35,000 foot question. We're talking about the future of the country here now. Go ahead.
I suspect it's a pretty small population or percentage that's sort of talking about what Naomi described, someone who's been locked. But, I hear of these people. I know a couple of them. But I think they also, they're terrified and they have quite a voice. You see them on Twitter. Then they're just pushing very, very hard to keep all restrictions in place. They have very loud voices. And because they cannot return to normal. I don't think they're capable of it at this point. I do think the vast majority of people want to go back to normal, but the problem is that most people don't care that much and will sort of just go along with whatever they're told to do. So the majority won't get up on the train and, scream that they're not going to wear a mask again, which I actually did. Although that
Yeah. I would add, too, that the 35,000 people in a stadium are self-selectedly not the people cowering in their rooms. Those people would probably decline. But look, I come at this from there's no way to know how widespread this is, right? But I think it's a very specific demographic. I mean, I think it's the most educated, liberal, chattering classes in a few cities, but those people have outsized influence on the culture, and they also happen to be my friends and family. So
and they're sitting in their rooms on the internet, so they may seem like a lot bigger percentage of the population than they are. They're not out doing things.
They're not out doing things. I mean, there's no way to know how widespread it is, but I do literally have a relative whom I love to bits who will not sit outside with me because I'm unvaccinated. And I have another friend, this, judge whom I mentioned.
Won't sit outside with you? Won't sit outside with you?
Will not sit outside with me because I might kill him by my presence. And I have this judge friend who won't go indoors with me. And he literally says, I don't sit indoors with unvaccinated people. So there are these deep pockets of highly educated people who, is it ideological? Is it OCD? Is it a mixture by now? I don't know. But let's move on to one population that I know is being harmed en masse, and that is children. I'm the stepmother of a 10-year-old. And when his school sent us a notice that some children were not wearing their masks correctly. And these kids wear masks 10 hours a day with mask breaks, right? And they were also not distancing correctly, and the children who forgot to properly wear their masks and distanced would be given physical reminders of double masking. So this is all child abuse in my view, but that is like extra criminal level child abuse. And I know, my poor stepson looked at what a double mask would look like, because this was such a traumatic thing to say to any child. But I also, I'm around 10-year-olds, and they've lost verbal skills. Their faces are affectless.
They don't know how to. Saw this. Someone was tweeting, and Jay Bhattacharya tweeted it, so I trust it. But the CDC has lowered the age of development now. So saying like, I don't know what the exact numbers were, but you're supposed to have this level of speech at 2 years, and now they're saying, okay, it's 3 years, because kids, they're being developmentally delayed by masks and presumably by like lockdowns, lost school. I have a lawsuit on behalf of a child, well, actually 4 children, siblings who are not vaccinated. They had COVID in the fall, and they keep getting quarantined because if you're not vaccinated, they quarantine the kids anytime they come into contact with somebody who had COVID. So these kids just keep losing school, as if they were vaccinated, they weren't. It's an underhanded way of coercing the parents to vaccinate them, of course, because they wouldn't be subject to these rules. But I mean, what we're doing to children in the name of public health is the most cruel, absurd thing I've ever. I can't believe it's the liberals who supposedly care about people and kids. It's just unconscionable.
So they can't resist. So the double mask, the dunce cap has become the double mask.
Yeah, but can you imagine if you read about that in a Dickens novel?
I know.
You'd think,
well, that's what I mean.
Thank God we have evolved past that point of brutality and ignorance and cruelty. And here we are.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that astonishes me is that all the other, upper middle class, educated, caring helicopter parents in this affluent neighborhood are not up in arms about this. They're okay with this threat against their children, and they're okay with their children. They literally say things like, I don't want my child to unmask if the other kids are masked, because he'll be ostracized. And you hear about that. You hear about kids, being told, the parents tell their children not to play with the unmasked child.
Yeah.
I'm hearing stories like this across the country. These kids are going to be scarred for life.
We need to come back for a follow-up conversation, because we're just now getting it. We've got a deadline we've got to get you to, but let's circle back to where we started. We started out with concerns about a totalitarian government, loss of freedom. It seems like we're not describing a population of people who are foremost concerned about their freedom. They're concerned about protecting themselves from all types of risk. It's crazy. It's a question of people's character, and I don't think the people we're describing here are very interested in freedom, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, all that sort of basic stuff.
No, they're not. They're interested in, and you said being safe from all sorts of things. I would say it's actually safe from one thing, like this one particular virus, but they're not thinking about, mental health, physical health in other ways. Sitting at home and, out in the dark is not healthy. In fact, obesity, vitamin D deficiency are two of the main causes of bad COVID outcomes. So people should be outside getting exercise, seeing each other.
But this gets into the news blackout, though, because we're not reading about all the other deaths. We're not reading about the cancer, the heart disease, the diabetes, the kids, the depression, the alcohol,
or
all those
that,
other sort of consequences.
Exactly. Johns Hopkins, I'm sure you guys heard, but had a study a few weeks ago where they said lockdowns had this was a huge meta study. Johns Hopkins isn't exactly a bastion of right-wing supremacy. It's from Johns Hopkins saying that their lockdowns had no benefits and massive downsides. The media didn't cover this study at all. And that's, the control of information.
I don't think Johns Hopkins even put out a press release, did they?
Did they? They didn't?
I think the doctor responsible for it did. I don't think they wanted to be associated with it. Or maybe they did.
I'm very cynical about why Johns Hopkins put that study out. They're one of the most egregious criminal entities when it comes to their dashboard being the one that everyone referenced, and a whistleblower who was working with them, imaging their data, leaked to me the GitHub account, which is where developers put raw data sets. and only 6 states were reporting. Their data were completely incomplete. And yeah, they're very corrupt. And I think that they're trying, like you see this about face institutionally, I think they're trying to lay down a paper trail, as the news emerges that data has been concealed and that bad outcomes have followed. That's my view. But yes, there is a media blackout. But I also wanted to say about people buying into this notion of not caring about freedom. I have a little bit of a different take because I love people in their 20s who will remain unnamed, and what they're hearing, and you see it on the New York City subways, is that it's caring to wear a mask, and it's caring to the community to get a booster, and that it's threatening to the community and to the elders and to your loved ones to not get a booster. So that's such a cynical thing. Genius campaign, it was focus grouped, is these bad actors with their millions and billions in influence campaigns figured out that appealing to the altruism and selflessness of that generation was a way to get them to comply. So they see freedom has been effectively rebranded as selfishness and harming others, whereas masking and distancing and injecting things is branded as taking care of your community. And you kind of can't fault young adults for being idealistic and wanting to serve their community, but their idealism has been hijacked.
Very Orwellian.
That's a pretty good. Well, we got to wrap. Naomi, thank you. Jenin, thank you. I feel like we're just beginning to get interesting. We got to start going for Joe Rogan links here. Next time we need 4 hours to unpack this. Naomi, where's the best place to find you? On Substack or where?
Certainly Substack and dailyclout.io, where we're fighting to change state legislation. I just want to say one thing, which is the record of this moment is being written now, and the heroes are being identified. And over, I noticed that 19 out of 20 of the heroes being showcased are men, and God bless them. They're very heroic men. Jenin Younes ran out in front of the troops in this battle at the very start when she saw how unjust it was. She's been courageous. She's been a warrior and a leader. And she's a hero of this movement. So I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you so much, Naomi. Well,
I so agree. That's why you've been back here 3 times. And you're going to be coming back time after. Yeah, you were early.
Yeah.
And we talked about it. You paid a personal price. So have you, Naomi. But I mean, you really had to jettison a lot of what you were and became something else.
Yeah.
I get to hang out with people like Jenin now, so that's okay.
Well, that's great.
I get to be on the right side of history with the cool kids.
Jenin, we can find you at the what are our acronym? Not
the New Civil Liberties Alliance.
It's a wonderful place founded by Philip Hamburger, and I think we've described a very litigation-rich environment for you guys to help get back on.
Yeah, and I also have a very active Twitter account in my name.
What's your handle?
Lefty Lockdowns 1. Actually, it's a long story about why that's kind of a stupid handle, but I didn't really understand how Twitter worked when I created it, and it was shortened from Lefty Lockdown Skeptic, but they haven't suspended me yet. We'll see. I know. I'm preparing to meet Naomi's fate.
All right. Well, thanks. This is just so interesting, and anyway, this has been the Bill Walton Show, and we're here with Naomi Wolf and Jenin Younes, and we're talking about the. I don't know, what are we talking about? The future of mankind, I think.
Yeah.
And anyway, we hope you'll join us again. We're, of course, you can find us on CPAC Now and For America and all the major podcast platforms, YouTube, Rumble. I think YouTube will keep this one. I don't think we've said anything particularly non-YouTube.
The Pfizer vaccine.
Pfizer vaccines. But we skirted on the edges of the truth police. Anyway, thanks for joining, and we'll talk with you next time. Thanks. Bye. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.